Let's open our plenary this morning with questions that are on your mind from last night. And I know one or two people have said they had a sleepless night considering all of the issues. So I know people are taking, these are serious issues, and we have a lot of work to do to make sure we're getting the best recommendations we can. Anne, on table 6, lovely.
Hello there. I have 2 questions. The first question is on soil and soil testing of microorganisms. I was at an event recently during the summer, Farming for Nature, and the farmer there told me that the soil health is dependent on these microorganisms. But he sent his soil sample, had to send it over to the UK for testing. I was wondering about this. Why have we no facilities here in Ireland for testing analysis of soil for microorganisms? So I'm wondering, could that be addressed, and would there be a change on that in the future? The second question is on forests and forestry, and it's about the grant system. I'm wondering, is there an equity between growing in regards to grants with regard to forests which are coniferous as distinct from broadleaf, and because it is biodiversity loss and we're trying to enhance biodiversity, is there a possibility that broadleaf trees could get precedence over coniferous ones in terms of grants, because they are enriching the soil and the life in the soil. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Anne. 2 great questions. Who on the EAG, the Expert Advisory Group, would like to take those?
Sure, I can start. On the soil testing side at the moment, the labs in terms of their accreditation in the country are mainly set up for soil chemical and physical tests, so it's soil structure, soil quality and soil chemistry in terms of pH, lime requirement, phosphorus, potassium, and some organic matter, and soil bunk density in terms of carbon sequestration. So it can be done within labs in Ireland, but it's not done on a wide scale basis. So that's why in the UK there's more of a demand for this. So the labs, it has been worth their while setting up and having microbiologists tested and set up that in the lab equipment. So it can be done, but the demand isn't there for it yet because the standard tests don't incorporate the microbial analysis at the moment. So that's that one. On the grants for the forestry system, there's different grant rates. They are distinguished in terms of broadleafs have a higher grant rate than the coniferous plantations, but they both have the same 15-year premium rates. And we know that with coniferous plantations, you can get a return in terms of thinnings at 15 years and clear felling at 30 to 40 years, whereas you're waiting at maybe 40 to 50 years and 80 years for the returns from the income. So there does need to be some more differentiation, I think longer term grants for the broadleafs on that perspective. Plus some of the ones in terms of agroforestry and some of them and the native woodland scheme are only for 7 years. So it's less than actual the conifers thing. So there is a bit more of a weighting towards in the grant system as well towards the production forest because of the need and undersupply of timber for the building sector and the need for timber as well. So there is a slight weighting, a higher weighting in that, but that needs to be more rebalanced, I think. And longer term grants, and this long termism that we've seen from the speakers yesterday was really highlighted, that we need longer term commitments to pay and incentivise the provision of these environmental services that aren't returned in the markets. But I'm hoping that we'll see some changes in that now in the new forestry policy and for consultation next week, but we'll see.
Okay, thank you, James. Yeah. We have a question at number 2. Thanks, Caroline. Get the microphone to Emma.
Hiya, my name is Emma. I just want to know, at the moment there's a lot of private consultancy work going on in Ireland, and is there a possibility that that survey work could feed into the data gaps for the National Habitat Map or the National Countryside Survey work that needs to be done? Is there a chance that that work could be used as a dual purpose? Thank you.
I can comment on that. It's a great point. You're absolutely right. And I would have worked in several state agencies that are wrestling with that same problem. In other words, every year hundreds and thousands of consultancy studies are done, environmental impact statements and appropriate assessments, and hundreds and hundreds of pages that go in to the county councils, to the Marine Institute, to the EPA, and they're not used in the way that they could be because there isn't a proper national database system. Now, they can be used, I think, more, but there isn't a central repository for them in the country. That's the first thing. And different state agencies have talked to each other, but there isn't a solution to that. On the other hand, you talked about the National Habitat Map and so on. I think personally, based on my experience, and we heard this from some of the speakers yesterday, it is more appropriate for the state to take the lead on that because it has the long-term resources. So Tagasc and the Ordnance Survey and the EPA, which are three agencies that have great skills and resources in mapping and in GIS, have come together. It's not quite there. James, in an answer to a question, said yesterday it's coming soon. But I think that's the place where a long-term commitment is needed for that. It's been too slow. It is coming. But the question of all the private consultancies is a really good one. It's hanging out there. It's not solved. Thank you.
Okay. More questions in our plenary today. If anyone else would like to... Not a lot of... Okay. David, thank you.
Thanks very much. Our table gave a hard question to Quilcha yesterday, but I found that one of his answers kind of led us a little bit further into the unknown of where is all this policy mess coming from. And what he said, now I am going to ask a question, but what he said was we have an obligation to the state to providing income to the state. So what we're seeing with, I think it was Lynn Dix yesterday, she's saying that there is an unsustainable status quo in terms of this corporatization of the food supply. So I suppose the question is, how much of the policy that we get from Europe is a result of corporate lobbying to create policy at a European level? How much of it is to protect profits, to, in Ireland's case, pay back the ECB for our unsustainable debt? Is there a resolution at that level? I mean, I have to say I don't really understand all this, but I think this is where it's going. And I think we have to ask questions about how does local Ireland build up its environment while all the time being subject to some kind of corporate policy making being made at a much higher level than our own government is able to make. Does that make sense to anyone?
Does. Thank you very much, David. Mary, you can take it first. I imagine there might be a few answers to this one.
I think indeed there might be, and apologies for the voice firstly. I think I'm going to take a tiny step back from that and go, because you were talking about basically it's all about money, it's and then you have the lobbying element as well, but I don't think we can cast all the blame at the EU level by any means here. You're sort of asking about, there's a corporate focus that this is sort of driving the industry and where is this coming from? Well, the Quilcha, it's based in the Forestry Act from 1988, and in the objectives, and I was frantically getting my phone so I could look up the specific objectives there a second ago, but if you look at it, it's about setting up the business, it's on a commercial basis, it's about being a profitable operation. Those are within Irish legislation, and it is there for good reason also about gaining money, being an economic enterprise and providing timber. But those are the core objectives that you can see within the legislation there that are driving this. It is possible to change this, it is possible to balance them out more, but that is basically underpinning that industry there. And then you'll see later documents where they're focusing more on environmental aspects as well, but that's their core objectives. And yes, we have been in very bad places with money in this country before, and we are trying to make money. This is one aspect of it. There have also been debates about what to do with Coillte before. My voice is now going to go again, so I'm going to pass on to anybody else in this panel who wants to go. Sorry.
Thanks, Mary. James?
This is a big question, but as Mary points out, the issue with the remit of organisations like Coillte, for example, is set under national legislation. So that's a national issue, and the 1988 Forestry Act sets out the objectives of Coillte, which is an overriding profit-making generation of wood. And coming from that time, that's where that has come from. But times have changed. So as we said previously, in the previous week, legislation needs to change as objectives of society changes. On the corporate side and where the power lies, in terms of the way the EU operates, the European Commission are the civil service of the EU. They together propose the legislation but the main power in terms of decision making of what goes into this is the Council of Ministers, which is all our elected representatives that sits on the Council of Ministers, and also voting rights by the European Parliament that are elected by the local communities all around the EU as well. That them at ministerial level and at MEP level and at commission level, through civil dialogue groups, through lobbying, are subject to lobbying. Obviously the groups that have the most money have permanent offices in Brussels and direct contact with the actual politicians, who are sitting around round tables like this with them on a regular basis. So money to a certain extent facilitates access. The solution to this, though, is transparency. That everything that's said at them meetings, that is done at them meetings, that is lobbied to politicians, needs to be recorded and transparency. The trouble is, there is mechanisms, Mary probably know about this, about transparency and recording of lobbying registers, but then to have the time to go through all that and all that documentation, again, takes time. And generally the civil society groups, the NGO, obviously someone sitting in their own home in a local, in your house, doesn't have time to go through all that. So there are barriers to this because of the complexity. And this, I suppose my main point is this: we need to simplify the complexity. Even the example I'm most familiar with is the Common Agricultural Policy. That our own individual CAP strategic plan, where we've a lot of power over that, is a 702-page document. That is not easy for anybody to read through. So it's all transparent, all the decisions are there, you know, but you have to go through an awful lot of paperwork to find the answers. Now, I know maybe that's not the correct response, but I think it's not as simple as, you know, there's this body of corporates who have all the politicians in their pockets with money, but it's that this sort of intricacies of the system facilitate more access for power and money, and having the time and resources to do that. I don't know if other people on the panel would agree with that, but that's just what I think.
Just one other comment. I'd remind people of a really powerful, simple statement that was said yesterday by the woman on the panel out of the 8 people on the farming groups, Aidan McGlone, and she said something very simple. We removed biodiversity, we being farmers, because of income and because of policy. So it goes back to your question, David, about how do you influence policy. And put that then in the context of the other farm organisations. It was very interesting to listen to them. Basically, they will respond to public pressure and they will respond to policy. Yes, they will lobby, but if the policy coming out, let's say in our recommendations, is we need more support for sustainability, for advisors, because that was a key thing that was coming out yesterday, then I think it's possible for the farm organisations to say, actually, that's in their interest too, and they use their lobbying to get behind that. I was encouraged by that yesterday.
Okay, thank you for those responses, and I'm going to come to Keith in a second, but just to respond to that point, David, our specific recommendations that have been given to us by the Oireachtas says we are to make recommendations on opportunities to improve the state's response to the challenge of biodiversity loss, how that can be resourced and implemented, and specifically opportunities to develop greater policy coherence. So that's a recommendation that can come directly from this Assembly, directly to the terms of reference, that maybe that policy on Coillte or CAP or whatever, that whatever the room decides, that is within our remit to do that. So thank you for the question. Keith, on table 14.
Yeah, there was a couple of really interesting things yesterday in terms of one of the phrases that caught me was from the organic farmer when he said, basically, if the government tell us clearly what they want, then that's what we'll do. So I think clarity in terms of what the government want out of this is really key. The second thing is that the Burn project was really interesting and quite invigorating to see how things can actually work. It's a real pity that it's ending at the end of the year to be replaced by the National Acres Scheme, because it's taking out of the mix the local community element, which I think is actually an important part of encouraging farmers, and replacing it with a national scheme. One of the things that struck me was in terms of the farmers being able to qualify for the agri-environmental schemes. I was actually surprised at how few farmers actually qualify. If we want to do this biodiversity, it needs to be on a national basis everywhere. Why can not all farmers qualify for the agri-environmental schemes?
Thanks, Keith. Micheál, James, and anyone else?
Yeah. I know an awful lot what's going on with the Burn programme, because I finished working on the initial LIFE programme that it was based on in 2008 with Brendan, and we have devoted the last 15 years to try and scale that up to the rest of the country. So the situation is that the local level isn't lost, and the Acres General that was talked about a lot yesterday has also a sister. It's misfortunate they both have the same names because they're totally different programmes. The Acres Cooperation Project that Brendan mentioned. And that Acres Cooperation Project is meant to be designed with the locally adapted, results-orientated hybrid scheme that was the basis of the Burn. In the negotiations with the government departments and with Brussels over the last 12 months, we first had to make a situation where the regulations in Brussels were changed in negotiations in 2018 and 19. The articles in the regulations have been changed to facilitate this locally adapted, results-based approach, and the Commission has now left the flexibility to the Member States to design it in their CAP strategic plans. The Department of Agriculture and the Irish Government and the Ministers have agreed that the locally adapted approach that has been developed in the Burn and tested and rolled out in these various EIPs should be rolled out around the country. The plan on the local side of things is there's 8 now local cooperation projects, including the Burn, the Aran Islands and parts of Galway are included in one area. We have Connemara, Mayo, Donegal, the eastern uplands and the southeastern uplands where the Hen Harrier programme is as well. So there's going to be local programmes there. The plan was that they were going to have local action and diagnosis plans, which they would still have. They were meant to be done in consultation with stakeholders. But the whole negotiations took so long. The final spec has only been published in the last month. The actual has to be rolled out to farmers on the 1st of January. There hasn't been time for sufficient consultation at local level, and there's been an information vacuum. Brendan is very frustrated on this, as a lot of us are. And the situation, could be a lot better. The 10,500 is a problem, there's not enough money in it. The local approach is slightly lost or slightly hidden in all this. It could be a lot better, but we're on the right trajectory. And one of the things I worry about at the moment is the Acres General one is just a replacing of the general approach, and having the same name on a local approach that could be an awful lot better is a lack of transparency, and the whole process could be lost.
Thank you, James. Micheál, did you want to respond to Keith's question as well?
No, just that I would echo what you said yourself at the beginning, which is this idea: if the government tells us, what they want in terms of policy direction, and so if you think back on the narrative of all during yesterday, from the time that Ireland joined the European Community, which is nearly 50 years ago, January 1973, next January it'll be 50 years, there was a direction of policy for agriculture which was expansion, intensification, and the most recent phase of that was abolishing the milk quotas in 2015. And all those policy documents, Food Vision, Food Harvest, Food 2020, were driving that. Some of the speakers said, okay, they may have left out sections, but by and large for dairy and beef and so on, that was what was happening. Our job, in my mind, if the citizens think there is a need for this, is to shift that narrative so that the policy direction is genuinely, in some way or another, not just about intensification. And the signal from all of the farm organisations yesterday was they will respond so long as the policy is matched by resources. And that's the question. It has to be really properly matched in terms of both resources for the farmers, but also resources for the work that Brendan and James and these people have been done over the years, the learning, local learning. That's what it's about. And I am optimistic, as I said, that that can be done. Thank you.
Mary?
I'll keep this quick for multiple reasons. Just to say, it's not just about getting more funding. I think there's a danger that the thing that's come out across multiple weekends now has been we all need more money. We all do need more money. It would be very nice. It would be very useful. And it is very important. But it's what that money is then used for. And there are multiple funding streams in agriculture and other areas as well. And it's a question of what balance is, where the balance of funds is, and which streams are then weighted. And some streams are going to be more effective than others. And again, James could tell you a lot more about this than I could for it. But also there's, going back to that idea of the eligibility, because obviously more money facilitates more people being involved in it. But again, the balance between the streams does that too. But sometimes they'll put in criteria such as you have to have at least 5 hectares or 10 hectares, or you'll have to have certain type of land. And that's a question too of what sort of eligibility criteria do you want, or does the policy need? And could we have, for instance, group applications more or something like that? But I'm throwing those open as sort of points. Leaving it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mary. Thank you for those questions. Thank you to our expert advisory group, Ian, James, Jenny, Taz, Mary and Micheál. We will applaud them as they leave the stage, and we're going to switch into our next session now.